And then we just had about 4 hours of closing.
4 hours. So JR tried to back you down on that a little bit.
I don't know, man. I mean, he went like 45 minutes before lunch. Came back at
I
like
love
an hour. We stayed an hour before lunch. We came back at like 2:20 and went till 5, after 5, or just around 5. I mean, it was closer to 4 than 3. And that's where you lose a jury, because you don't want to retry the entire case. You just want to powerfully highlight and sum up the strengths. If you just bring forth every piece of evidence that ever was presented, they get lost. The powerful points get lost in the less powerful points. And at the end of the day, the jury's just like, well, okay. I don't know. I mean, I hope, dear God, that John Metters is the final closing tomorrow for the state. I hope Jim Griffin, he's definitely going to be more kind of folksy and conversational. He might have a problem kind of ratcheting up appropriate emotion in the right places. I don't know.
He has not been very emotional this trial. He resonated with, he had a connection with Alex Murdaugh. And he probably actually genuinely likes Alex Murdaugh.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Jim Griffin's in at least 2 of the confession videos from Alex Murdaugh. He was down at Moselle the night of the killing of Paul and Maggie. And lest anyone forgets, I mean, he was already representing Paul on the felony voting under the influence charges that the Attorney General's office brought on that case. So he would have been having a relationship with Alex Murdaugh before the killings. He would have known the family, but he's baked into this case. I mean, he could do a lot with that. If he uses it to his advantage, he could really talk from personal experience. He could be doing the I know Alex Murdaugh.
I mean, he literally could say that. It's not evidence in the case, but you're allowed to make inferences. And it's been inferred and acknowledged and pointed out by the state that he was his lawyer. So he can speak, really, because of that evidence in the case, what he knows of that family, his own personal experiences. I've seen Alec rock, when he's thinking hard or he's upset. So that is fascinating, because Jim Griffin is evidence. And to the point about who's doing the closing, it's pretty interesting that really you wonder how much Alec Murdaugh influenced the decision for Griffin to do the closing instead of Harpootlian. I mean, Harpootlian, this might be the biggest case he does at the tail end of his career. I don't know. He might have some tricks up his sleeve, but he's a guy that likes the limelight. There was some discussion about trying to split the closing that Newman shot down.
Yeah,
so
he raised that legal issue to Judge Newman. He requested it. It wasn't anything subtle. He said, listen, I'm asking for the court to consider allowing us to both do the closing. And Judge Newman said, well, I've never done that. I haven't heard of that. And Harpootlian was trying to reference a case that he did as a prosecutor where a defense lawyer was able to convince a judge to allow that. So he clearly wanted to have a role in the closing. And you're right. I mean, that decision has been made to hand that over completely to Jim Griffin, and I do feel it's probably to have someone connect. I find it very important that the lawyer that is directing a criminal defendant, you've got to have a connection there in front of the jury, or you don't have to, but if you're doing your job right, your connection is being made in front of the jury in a way to humanize someone charged with terrible, terrible crimes. And so then if you take that person and you've got that connection on display, and then you display it again in closing, you can really reference. And when he told me from that witness stand that he would never kill Paul and he would never kill Maggie, and I believe him because I know him. I've known him, that kind of thing. He can use that to persuade and empower 12 jury members.
As long as they think that Griffin is credible.
True.
And he has resonated relatively well. He's had his faults. I mean, he's been accused of opening the door a couple times, but he has. And I think he is a genuine guy. So, like, you know, Harpootlian has his strengths, and he can also be pretty tricky and maybe come across as less genuine than Griffin. So, if Griffin is going to vouch for Murdaugh based on his past experience, it is a good thing that he does seem genuine.
If you guys were closing this case, what would you hit on? What would be your real strong points that you would drive home?
We're closing for his
defense.
I assume.
Yeah, sorry.
There's a lot. There's a lot.
You have to, again, you have to empower that jury to pull themselves up by their bootstraps out of this sinkhole of despair and unrelated wrongs and crimes to focus just like a laser on the murder case, to let them know, hey, he's gonna be held accountable. Don't you worry about him walking free. He confessed to financial crimes here because it was so important for him to tell you and look you in the eye and tell you how he feels about his family and tell you how he did the best he could under difficult circumstances. He opened up his soul to you, admitted that he was a junkie, that he was struggling, that he was a thief, that he wasn't, you know, he didn't treat his clients the way he should, but he also looked you in the eye and you could see and feel how much he loved his family. And you do not have to feel good about Alex Murdaugh. You do not have to come away from deliberations thinking he's a good man or a good person, but you have to think, and your duty is to think, have they proven beyond a reasonable doubt that he murdered his wife and his youngest son, people that everybody says he loved dearly? And that's that you want to squarely put them in there, frame that box, and then drop the seeds of reasonable doubt of how he couldn't. It had to be two shooters. Mike Sutton extrapolated from SLED data just to tell you an approximation that is way more likely to have a short shooter than Alex Murdaugh. Sure, Murdaugh could be on his knees. Is that reasonable in this dynamic fight? And continue to try to drop these seeds and say, look, this is the best system in the entire world. The highest standards, beyond a reasonable doubt. Don't lessen it. Don't cheapen it. Hold them to their burden. And kind of wink, wink, nod, nod. Don't you worry, he's not going anywhere.
And then you attack the theory of the state that they really wanted to bootstrap their case by calling it motive to bring in the financial crimes, when the way they've used it was more in line of showing that he's a bad guy. That's called propensity evidence, and it's not allowed, not permissible under our rules. But the state called it motive, but never really used it in a motive fashion, because it made no sense, the financial crimes, to then kill his family. If he had been pumping up his life insurance policies under Maggie or Paul, that would make sense, but he wasn't. So what you have to do is say, listen, he was the sloppiest financial criminal ever. He was leaving, double cash checks around. There was no hidden anything. It was just all out. He was just reckless. He was recklessly lying to clients. There was just so much money that no one really found out about it. And guess what? Until it really came down to the murders of his family, where the scrutiny from a law enforcement perspective, at least, really came bearing down on him. Yes, his law firm was becoming aware, but the scrutiny of the murders is what brought down the hammer stroke from law enforcement. So what you say is, he can't be the most manipulative, mastermind, high-functioning, double murder committer in a way that is so intelligent, former prosecutor, trial lawyer who can cry and lie easily and convincing, and then also, manipulate timelines and crime scenes in such a way, even putting the dogs back in the wrong kennel spots to make law enforcement believe somebody else that wasn't familiar with the scene would do that. So doing all these things to hide a double murder, but yet being so sloppy on the financials. So that, I would be attacking that as well, as reasonable doubt, to show the inference that, hey, he ain't the one. He ain't the one, is what I'd be doing, along with what my brother said.
And people are mentioning the rumors of the cartel, and I know that we floated the Ozark theory actually here for the first time, Do you want to give like a little refresh about your theory with that? Because I know that people are wondering. It just doesn't make sense.
This was around the time when everybody was wondering whether cousin Eddie Smith was going to testify. It seemed like he probably would, then it seemed like he didn't. But just once the financials came out and you saw that he had $500,000 of payments to cousin Eddie Smith, and that we were in real time getting all the heavy hammer blows of the financial crimes, we're thinking, well, how does he get out of this? He's a proven liar, but that money doesn't make sense for drugs. What is really going on with all that money? And it was also around, Jim Griffin began cross-examining the lead investigator on whether he was aware that cousin Eddie was getting his drugs to provide to Murdaugh from a local gang, and he basically said yes. And he was asking him if he was aware that cousin Eddie was in over his head to this local gang, and he basically didn't deny it. We started kind of probing there, and so we're like, okay, if it's not Alex Murdaugh, okay, but he's down there right before, and who could have this credible reason to send him a message? Someone who the whole world think is like the son of prominence, fourth generation prosecutor, the biggest law firm in the state, driving around with badges and blue lights on your car. They're going to see him as a whale, as a mark. You can see from the highly entertaining and well-watched show Ozark, you start getting it over your head, they get leverage on you because they're selling you drugs, and they say, all right, you're going to wash our money. You got ties with law enforcement. You're going to tell them to look the other way when we bring our big shipment of heroin through the low country. You can do that. We know you can. And if you start, as Murdaugh is doing, already having years of kind of living too above his means, who knows how long he might have been in with this element, but if it doesn't start working, or you get behind on what that serious criminal element is trying to have you do, you start panicking. They want to send you a message. There would be no point to kill him because he can't continue to wash your money or have the cops cover up, and look the other way when you're bringing in your drugs. So they may be watching you, surveilling you, see him leave, and then destroy his family to send that point that you will never cross us again. To me, when we dropped that theory, it was really the only type of theory that could play out, that he could reveal that no one else could reveal.
Well, at the time we felt that he was going to have to testify, and we were right about that. We were saying that from the beginning. And if we were representing him, we would be telling him the same thing. You're going to have to explain your lies, explain everything to, on the one hand, gain credibility back with a jury because you're a liar, you're a financial criminal. Hold your hand up on that in front of this jury. And then let's talk about what happened. If you're not the shooter, you're going to expound upon what's going on. So what he's done is kind of half Ozark. He's basically said, well, of course it's not me, but I think, somebody with hate in their heart,
right,
from someone that's been whipped up by the media regarding the boat accident, someone that was already evil and kind of latched on to mistruths and media speculation, came and did this thing to my family. Now, I don't think that's the truth. I don't. I think he knows more, but I think that was the sanitized version of our Ozark theory that Alex Murdaugh chose to use in his testimony. I don't think he's the shooter, but I don't think he was truthful about his true beliefs on who killed his family.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. I have a hard time believing that Alex Murdaugh alone even was the shooter. I do believe that he knows what happened, and I don't believe that it is whatever this boat drama. I don't believe it has anything to do with that. I believe he sees that was like an easy cover for something deeper, maybe maybe bringing in his financial stress, whatever have you. I believe that he knows who did it, but he may have not done it himself. That's just kind of where I'm at now.
My hunch would be that he was living a lifestyle over his means, and he got tied in, let's say, with Cousin Eddie due to the opioid addiction. And Cousin Eddie would have connections to a criminal element in the Low Country that would be moving large amounts of drugs. And I probably, and this is all speculative, probably through the relationship with Cousin Eddie would have proposed a way to make a large scale amount of money if Alex Murdaugh could put down a chunk of change to purchase narcotics, to then make an investment on that return. And then somewhere in that business transaction, they got sideways with a major criminal element. That would be my, like, really get deep on this case.
Well, if we were his lawyers, we would have tried to delve into that into a credible way and see where that went. See if he could produce the receipts. Because then it explains you're owning up to being a bad guy, but you didn't kill, and it might even explain why someone was keeping tabs on you, watching you, waiting for the moment where you just left your family so they could ambush them and say, look, get on the right track, buddy. Otherwise, we know you've got one son left. I mean, it would have to be something like that, I think, for him to truly have a chance of walking.
And if you're trying to really kill yourself, and it's not a guilty conscience for killing your family, if you're really trying to end your life because your financial crimes have been revealed due to, in part, to the scrutiny from the murders, but you're in over your head and you're worried about, threats on Buster or other family members, and you know that this criminal element is targeting you, and you end your life to hopefully release that pressure valve, and also there's a sizable amount of money for Buster to receive on the end of a life insurance policy, that tracks for me. That makes sense. And if he's, if he truly is part of the problem, because let's say hypothetically he's done this transaction with Cousin Eddie and it's gone way south, and he feels guilty because he knows that that's the reason that his family's dead, then he ends his shame, he ends his misery, he ends his heartache at the killing of his family, and he also ends a problem for any kind of major criminal element to have to worry about, and hopefully the rest of his family is safe. I mean, that all tracks to me. It does not, I agree with Creighton Waters, the sensationalized aspect of the boat accident, for whatever it is. I mean, that may be true, but that's not gonna, I don't think that's gonna motivate someone, on the periphery of that situation, hearing things in social media and activate them. I think that's unrealistic. And I think Creighton Waters and John Metters will be talking about that, how unrealistic that is. And Creighton talked about it today, and I'm sure John Metters will be talking about it as well.
And I also think on that point, that reminds me of what Creighton said, that he was essentially, it was the pressure valve. It was too much. He was in debt, but when the law firm confronted him that day about missing money, he acts like that was the moment he decided, well, I'm going to put forth this motion, my plan to kill my family, to detract. But also that day, his dad went in the hospital. And so I would say someone of that amount of prominence, whose father, who's even more prominent, is in the hospital, and you have a hearing, let's say on Wednesday, I think it was, or Thursday of that week, that alone would get you out of that motion to compel if you're dealing with your dad. And it turns out that his dad died the same day that hearing was supposed to occur, the motion to compel. So did you need to blow away both of them just to get out of that? No, I think you had enough of a personal reason where if you called up that judge and said, my dad is in the hospital, oh, Handsome is in the hospital, I'm gonna be by his side, I can't do this hearing this week, you would have gotten out of that by just on a loan. And again, it doesn't make sense to say, to me, why kill both? Killing Paul while traipsing around the fields, if that was your plan, was to diminish the boat case and to detract through sheer sympathy, stage some kind of accident out there while checking the feeders. You don't need to kill your loving wife who has been by your side even through your opioid addiction, who has financial means through her property. Because remember, he had a hard time getting loans after the fact because all of her property and collateral, which was the bulk of it, was tied up in probate. So he couldn't just reach out and get another loan against, Moselle because it was in her name. So that doesn't really jive with the theory because it actually frustrated his attempts to get loans. And of course, you have the international microscope of his butt, which ultimately discovered all of these things through the killing. So, why kill two? I mean, under that theory, why didn't you lure Buster down and kill all three? I mean, it just doesn't exactly make sense under the motive theory. It never really has. And I'd be hammering that if I'm Jim Griffin tomorrow.
What doors do you think this case has opened in terms of like future criminal charges against Alec Murdaugh, and what would that look like moving forward?
I don't think any new doors are open. I think he's got 90-some pending charges, state and federal, all financial, other than this contraband charge he got this week for having a book passed to him, a John Grisham book by his son.
Yeah.
But I think it nailed all those doors shut. I mean, everything will live or die based on this murder conviction.
I mean, what was ensured during this trial? If for some reason that there's a hung jury, or remarkably an acquittal, he will very quickly get prosecuted on the financial crimes, and it'll be a guilty plea. And his lawyers will try to say, listen, he owned up to that, but for the murder charge subsequently, he would have already pled guilty to all that. He had to, assert his right to remain silent once the murder charge came. But he'll be in a position where they'll either call it to trial or they'll be scheduling a guilty plea, and you're gonna have that same kind of intense pressure, and you'll have however many victims, all the victims in that case, and he'll just be trying to say, listen, I did the best I could do to come clean on all that, because I even came clean in the middle of my murder trial. So if somehow he's not found guilty on the murders, he's gonna go down on the financials. He's gonna go down hard. I would bet, even with credit for coming clean, that he'd be trying to figure, I don't know how he would address restitution that would help him somehow, but he's going to get 20 years plus on the financials, which will effectively be 20 to 30 years. That's a life sentence for him. And then they'll circle back on the murder case. The way the Attorney General's office has tried this case so extensively, I don't see how they just, it's never going to be a plea. The only way it could be a plea is if it was somehow negotiated under a legal theory there's a case called North Carolina versus Alford. So let's say he gets 30 years in the financial crimes, but he's never going to admit to killing Paul and Maggie. And the Attorney General's office says, all right, let's do this again. Let's tee it up in 3 months. Let's all retool and let's pick a jury and let's do that again. Instead of that, he could say, well, I've got 30 years. I know I'm guilty on that. I will take a plea deal under North Carolina versus Alford, which is where you have to be getting a benefit for the bargain. So let's say, no more, 30 years negotiated by the state. He'll get 30 years but he's got to plead to 2 counts of murder. Murder carries 30 to life. And then Alex Murdaugh, knowing that he's damned on the financials and he's going to spend the rest of his life in prison on those, could say under Alford, because I'm getting a benefit, I can resolve my guilty plea without having to admit guilt on the record. And that is a legal kind of nuance where you can do a plea under Alford. A lot of prosecutors don't like it, a lot of judges don't like it, but that would be a legal avenue to not have to admit guilt on the record, but still getting a guilty conviction on 2 counts of murder if he got lit up on the financials, which I'm sure he will. But he may never want to even do it like that. He may want to run the gauntlet if somehow he's not found guilty. But that's something we haven't talked about.
Do you think, though, with like the Netflix documentary that came out, the HBO special, all of these ties, do you think we're going to hear anything more about Gloria Satterfield or Stephen Smith? Anything potentially that either Alec or Buster could be charged with in relation with their murders or deaths?
I think if there's some amazing investigative journalism that uncovers something to charge, well, sure. No one's going to hold back on charging him if they could prove it.
And just for the viewers that are outside of South Carolina, nationally and internationally, there's no statute of limitations on criminal charges at the state level in South Carolina. So he could be serving the 30th year of a 30-year sentence, and let's say if he confessed to another inmate about knowledge about something related to those crimes, the state could come back and prosecute him on them. There's no statute of limitations in state court in South Carolina on criminal matters.
And he's going to have a bunch of restitution assigned to him on these financial crimes. So, you know, the law firm has shelled out of their own pockets to make these victims whole. So they're a huge victim themselves, a debtor basically. But everything I've heard is that Alex Murdaugh, things are in the process of being sold. You know, anything that he outright owns that isn't, you know, attributed to Maggie's estate. You know, what's going to go to Buster. I mean, he's going to be stripped of everything he has available to pay back restitution. So sometimes you get in a scenario where he doesn't have that money. It's all gone to other family members. And, you know, he has an opportunity to make money off his rights, so to speak, whether it's a book deal or a movie deal or an exclusive interview from jail about why he thinks he's innocent. But a lot of times the government will try to take that money too.
Yeah.
And so that'll be interesting how that plays out.
The feds really love doing that.
The feds will seize your, and he does have federal charges. They will like to seize your assets. But there's so much attention on this. There will be avenues for him to make money. The question is whether he ever sees a dime of that, or does it go to, I mean, rightfully financial victims for sure.
So if he is found not guilty, would he walk free, go home?
No.
Okay. Talk us through what that would look like.
Yeah, he's got bond denied across the board. I mean, on the financials, on the murder. I mean, well, does he have the financials? I know he does on the murder.
He got, once he had the attempted suicide, I'm pretty sure he got his bond revoked.
And then more financial crimes that piled on.
The murder came after that.
Right.
So I think he has bond denied on murder. So let's say he was acquitted on that. You don't have a bond to deal with on that, but he's got, Judge Newman revoked his original bond on financials by saying he's a danger to himself, he's a danger to the community. And I don't think, there's no judge that's going to go out on a political limb and say, okay, you can walk free now. He will stay there.
He'll get remanded back to the Albanese Glen Detention Center,
which is where he's been living this entire time.
Except for the trial week where he's been down in college.
Right. And yeah, sure, if he had this great acquittal, I'm sure Mr. Griffin and Mr. Harpootlian at some point would file a motion trying to seek, for various reasons, you know, due to that change in circumstance, you know, the acquittal on the most serious charges, that he needs to assist them, work from the comfort of his home, or, you know, but I can't imagine a judge letting him out.
That's when Creighton Waters calls the financial charges to trial, and then Alex Murdaugh is forced to plead. Right. And then he goes to the South Carolina Department of Corrections, and so there would be no.
He's not getting out.
He will never be a free man again, even if he one day is acquitted on the murders, which seems unlikely at this point. I mean, as criminal defense lawyers, we see tons of reasonable doubt in this case, but there's also a lot of things that come in that are gonna really shape this case. You know, the financials, the suicide information, the drug use. I mean, things that jurors just can't forget, and Creighton Waters won't let him. So he will never walk as a free man ever again. It's just a matter of, does he get to be in prison as a annihilator of his family, a convicted annihilator of his family, or someone that was able to navigate that particular set of charges, but yet he did wrong, and he's gonna do lots of time on the financial crimes. And, you know, if you're sitting in his shoes, you're thinking, you know, I think he said he was like 500 and something days clean and sober. You know, he's going through all the steps. He's holding his hands up about being guilty on the financials. He did them wrong, but he'll never admit to being a killer of his family, I imagine. So it's all about how he spends the rest of his days in the Department of Corrections as either a financial criminal or a family annihilator and a financial criminal.
How old is he? Mid-50s?
54, I believe.
How old is Alec Murdaugh? I'm sure somebody here knows.
I think I'm right that he's 54, but I could just be,
You know, if
could be wrong.
this was not a murder
He's
case
54.
and we just had an enormous amount of white-collar theft and really sympathetic theft from people you had a fiduciary duty to represent, I could see a guy like him getting, blaming the drug addiction and probably getting something like 10 years plus full restitution. And, he would say, well, the only way I can pay them back is by working.
Well, he would be disbarred.
Well, he would be disbarred, but he could still make that claim and whatever work he could do, get into family business, sell tractors, whatever. So, but
You think John Marvin would take him?
well, he would be set up to do something to earn a living, and then that's how that normally would go. So you wouldn't normally expect to see 20, 30 years hung over his head just purely on financials in state court, typically. Especially with someone with no record, and but because that's the thing that I'm pretty sure Judge Newman has retained jurisdiction on all of it. So that's the kind of thing that Judge Newman will have his own opinions on it, regardless of the acquittal. If that were to happen, and probably it would be heftier than you would certainly see with just straight up isolated financial crimes, even of that value.
So speaking of financials, how is Alec Murdaugh paying for his defense?
Well, I think early on, before the murder charges, and I don't know how Dick and Jim do it, but they clearly were trying to set a fee. I mean, he's got people, and I don't know how much relatives ponied up, but anything that's not seized.
Well, right around the time of the murders, when they were already representing Paul on the boat case, that felony boating under the influence charge, they swooped in because they were already there, and they were representing him early on. Jim Griffin's in all these videos. They were having a lot of press conferences on national news. I remember Dick Harpootlian saying he's an opioid addict. He's broke. He's broke. He's broke. He's broke. So a lot of different ways to get paid. I mean, I know they sold off a lot of assets. I know that there was a freeze on his assets, and I know at some point there was a special hearing to pay for all these experts, and I think Judge Newman basically allowed a lot of these assets to be released. I mean, assets are going everywhere. They're doing the best to pay back victims, but I do remember hearing about some legal expert fees being allocated off of the sale of some property they had, and that was being authorized. But how else they're being paid? I mean, there's going to be, for better or worse, there's going to be all kinds of book deals and movie rights and all kinds of stuff, interviews, and I mean, it's just, I am aware that Dick Harpootlian one time took an indigent murder defendant fee for $1 just to
Stick it to the man.
Stick it to the man, and to get into a courtroom with a prosecutor that he was kind of sideways with, and that's been verified. So Dick's had a really lucrative career. He likes to be interested in cases that are relevant, that keep he likes to be in the action. So I have no idea what the financials are, but certainly there's money to be made, and of course it's going to be one of these cases that's going to go down. I mean, they will be teaching this case in law school, probably regarding appellate issues, but it'll be kind of like the OJ case. You know the names, Johnny Cochran. I mean, it's going to be one of those cases. It's going to be a decade kind of reference point case that people will be talking about for many years. So that could possibly be what is motivating the lawyers, other than just being working for a client they already were representing.
Sorry, we're having a side
it's
conversation.
good, it's good.
Does Judge Newman have any authority to like restrict or shut down Hollywood, for example, books, movies, any information, anything like that?
No, courts can't shut down the interest of the world and First Amendment rights to talk and and be paid for your likeness and all that. But once you receive that money, if you're under judgments to pay victims, and you see this all the time in federal court, kind of like when the IRS might garnish your wages if you're behind on your taxes. I mean, if there's money attributable to Murdaugh, and he's got a big judgment and let's say has pled to all these financial crimes and owes his old law firm or Tony Satterfield, let's just call it $2 million or whatever it is, he might get $2 million in a bank account, but restitution will be ordered through, to go to the victim. So now if he ends up making $10 million and all the victims have been paid and he's just like, well,
That's a lot of honey buns.
you can't take my money. I'm gonna profit off this story because the world's interested in my, there was, I think, the death penalty case with Mr. Colpep out of Spartanburg, who was accused of shooting lots of folks, and he had the woman tied up in his
bunker.
In his bunker,
right.
a trailer on his land. He had a huge amount of restitution to pay, and I'd heard wind he was like from prison sending, he would like trace his hand or something and then sell it on eBay.
Right.
And someone caught wind of that and said, "Oh, you can't do that because you got to pay your victims first. You got these judgments,"
Right.
and they shut it down. So he'll have opportunity to make a lot of money based on this story, but the victims will be paid through it, first and foremost.
Speaking of Judge Newman, you all have a lot of experience with him. Some viewers want to know, he seems pretty strict with what he allows, and sometimes maybe seems like he is short on patience. Can you guys just maybe tell the viewers a little bit about your experience personally with Judge Newman?
I'll let you start, Luke. Lots of stories.
He is strict. He expects a lot from the lawyers. He doesn't, as you've noticed, he doesn't like to make rulings in advance. He likes to typically have them play out and then decide in the moment. He doesn't want to hear a lot of hemming and hawing. You're not going to talk him out of something once he's decided. A lot of lawyers will go before some judges and think they can just keep yammering at that judge and eventually he will cave. Judge Newman is not going to do that.
Well, he does follow the law to the best of his abilities.
Right.
I mean, he normally is the type of judge that doesn't need to research the law. He knows it because he's very experienced. He also has a pretty good legal acumen. I mean, in court this week, he was Jim Griffin was making an argument. I can't remember what it was. He was citing a case, and Judge Newman said, "Well, that was my case," and it came back on appeal, and then I was reversed by the Court of Appeals, and then the Supreme Court reversed the Court of Appeals. So he was like right with it. He's got a really good recall. I will disagree a little bit, Luke. I mean, he will, and with our recent experiences, he's firm in his beliefs, but especially if he has time to read something. I mean, he does like things briefed in advance, or if you make an argument towards the end of the day, he'll say, "Give me the case law, and I will read it overnight, and I'll come back and I'll let you know my thoughts on it." And so he is persuaded with good lawyering, good researching case law.
Right, not just like yelling at him.
Oh, no. He's not.
Some less experienced judges might change their mind just simply because someone won't stop talking. He will never do that. We once had a pretty high-profile murder case. I won't say any names because it's still pending litigation, but where the credible evidence from our perspective seemed to indicate that a police officer could likely be a suspect, and that was high drama when we decided to put forth that evidence. It was unusual, it was not taken very well, but that's where the evidence led us. And after that hearing, after the trial, the judge did want to have a hearing to see if we, were in our following our ethical obligations, let's just say. And he gave us a little bit of a hard time, but once he really fleshed out how we got to that point, he said, okay, I'm satisfied with that. So that was a little scary moment. He can be intimidating, but he is typically just and fair.
He has a saying that the state never rests and the defense is always ready. So he likes well-prepared defense lawyers. I mean, he may act like, maybe slightly intolerant of some of these motions and things, but he really does like aggressive lawyering by defense lawyers, and he likes really thorough prosecutors. But he is, a looming presence in any courtroom. So he's really experienced. He's going to be coming up on retirement pretty soon, so he'll be a loss on the bench in the state of South Carolina, and someone's going to have to try to step up and fill his shoes. They are big.
Now that we are finally to closing, why don't each of you kind of share some of your favorite witnesses that have been on the stand for this case?
Well, for the state, I really like the dog kennel guy. Mr. Davis, I think his name was. Just not that he was
the folksy.
He was a folksy guy.
Folksy
He was like, I mean, there's certain ways to go pig hunting, and you ain't gonna go out unless you want to go grab them in there by your hands and pull them out. I mean, so he was just. I found him just straight up country, honest. Who
would play him in the movie? Let's do that. Let's name some witnesses and see who they'd be
would
playing.
Play that guy in a movie? I mean, I think almost like Billy Bob Thornton could play that guy. I mean, that guy was way large, and Billy Bob's not. But you could have all kinds of characters play that guy. But I don't think that guy's gonna have a really big important part in closing, though.
The water hose.
She asked who the favorite witness was, and just from a personal level.
And I did get lost a little bit in the almost 4-hour closing by Creighton, and I had to jump up a couple times and do some lawyer work. Did he really harp on the blue raincoat all that much in closing?
I don't think I heard it mentioned.
Who?
Creighton.
Today?
Did we talk about the blue raincoat?
I didn't hear much about the blue raincoat, which honestly seems like an injustice to everyone that's watched this. I feel like that should have been.
I kind of glazed over, but I don't think he did. As much as we spent like a day on the blue raincoat and the GSR in it.
I remember said that he did mention it.
But that was like.
It wasn't a lot, but it was mentioned.
That was 2 days, or that was like a week of witness and examination from where it came from, and poor Shelley Smith having to talk about it and then be cross-examined about it, and
I think it got so blown out of the water that I think that he spent most of his time saying, well, there was this time when he could have gotten rid of evidence while outside at Alameda, and he kind of was more wanting to highlight that time frame and the structures around Alameda where that could have occurred than the whole he took them inside in this blue raincoat at some point. Like,
for the defense, I would say.
Someone just said, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Someone said, I was playing a drinking game today, and every time Creighton Waters said liar, took a drink. I can't feel my face. That's funny.
Oh, man.
I was just thinking about your question about who's the favorite witness and who you want to be focusing on in closing. I would talk a lot about John Marvin. I mean, he did a couple things. He made this crime. He cleaned up Paul. And so not only was he a likable, credible witness, he didn't have any of the baggage of his brother, but he's doing something in a way, and he kind of vowed to find the killer of Paul and Maggie. And, that kind of setup allowed him to say, Jim Griffin said, have you found this killer? No, I haven't to this day. But he also I know Jim Griffin's going to be talking about the sloppy investigation from SLED. And John Marvin kind of personifies that because you had the example with Maggie's phone, and he was able to, through the Find My Friends app, figure out where it was and ask SLED, do you want to go get this thing? I can see where it's up the road before the battery dies on it. And they said, no, we're not. We'll do that our own way. And then he and Duffy Stone, the local solicitor, went and got it, went and identified it. So he's a great person to humanize his brother. He was there taking him to rehab. He kind of is coming to grips with his brother's flaws while simultaneously talking about how terrible the SLED investigation was and his belief that his brother didn't do it. And he was an incredibly powerful witness, and that's why they ended he was one of their closing witnesses. I don't know if he was the last one, but it could have been. But I think I'd be talking about him a lot in closing.
I'm thinking my favorite for the defense is probably Mike Sutton, because math doesn't lie, math is not biased. And he literally used SLED's math on angle and trajectory and just pulled it all the way out into about the location of where a shooter would have been regarding Maggie, and showed us through measurements how anybody in a reasonable shooting stance, how tall would they have been? Yeah, I mean, you can tell how much the state feels it's a threat to them by how much they make fun of it or try to talk about it. And sure, there's variables, but you're talking about natural shooting positions for what they would say is a dynamic case where Maggie is running, moving, the shooter is running, moving. They're like, well, he could have been on his knees. Well, if you're on your knees, you're not running and moving very well. You're not going like this. So, but if you're 6'4", you're either holding your rifle like that, or it might be kind of in a less focused way at a lower position. But, and a lot of people said, well, he shot him from the golf cart. Okay, what did he do? Shoot. I mean, the shotgun was not shot from a golf cart. The kill shot, according to the state's theory, the butt of that gun would be in the floor. So what did he do? Then hop on his golf cart, turn the wheel, drive over to Maggie, and start shooting with his Blackout 300? No, that's not what happened. So I like things that aren't biased. We all have bias. We all have implicit bias. Some of us have the express bias. We're all looking to feed into what we already think happened. Mm-hmm. But math and science do not have those things. So anything that involves math and science, I mean, that's something that just can't be messed with. Even the pathologists who are using scientific methods to determine cause of death and, let's say, a path of a bullet in a body seem very much subject to interpretation. But physics doesn't have that. You literally take a line that SLED says was the line, and then you move it out to where the shooter would have been. Why wasn't SLED interested in that in the first place? I don't know. They would have had a much stronger position had they done that in the first place.
And we've had cases against SLED where they use that kind of technology, that graphic that Sutton used and reconstructed based on, the lines and like the laser imaging. We've seen cases like that. Yeah. We have cases right now pending with SLED where they've reconstructed crime scenes like that.
In this case, they just didn't extrapolate it out.
Right.
And I liked how Sutton was able to extrapolate it out to the position centrally around the shell casings where the action was. And he said with a 12-foot radius, not saying precisely the shooter was here or there, but let's just put it in a reasonable area. And then what are the distances of those trajectories based on SLED's own measurements? And how could that, if it's this high, well, how can a person, let's say of Murdaugh's height, reasonably hold that firearm in that point? Very interesting. So it just doesn't have any bias to it. There's no wiggle room. So I appreciate a witness like that. I think if I'm a juror and you see so much bias from caretakers, whether it's night shift or day shift,
drop a comment. Are you team AM or team PM?
How was that housekeeper handoff?
Yeah, that had to be fireworks. If you guys don't know what we're talking about, the state called the PM housekeeper, caregiver.
Right, Miss Shelley. And then the defense called AM Miss Mixon.
And they had two different stories.
100%. There was no raincoat permits mixing, no blue, nothing. No tarp laid out. And they both love that family dearly. So, very interesting there, but...
Some people are wanting to know, in your experience with SLED and like crime scene investigation, where's the bar set? Obviously, we have a lot of great respect for law enforcement. Do you think that it is oftentimes lacking? Or
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
I mean, especially in complex crime scenes, there's always something that could have been done better. Sometimes law enforcement does great, but in this crime scene, I think objectively we've heard about, shoe prints that could have been preserved better. We've heard about, without any kind of real pushback, we've heard about Maggie's phone was not secured properly by SLED, and the GPS data was allowed to be, was deleted because it wasn't secured properly. We've heard about bullets and fragments, pellets being pulled out of windowsills and door frames that SLED missed that could, bring a new light to the shooting trajectory. We've heard about, not asking for clothes that maybe they should have been asking for. There's been a lot. We don't have, and not that they always have a duty and obligation to find a murder weapon before they can prosecute, but we don't have any weapons in this case. And there's been some jokes on the internet, on Twitter mostly today, about how, man, being a jury in South Carolina is tough. You gotta walk out into hog country and maybe find some rifles or two while you're out there. It's like, you just don't know. So I don't think SLED covered themselves in glory during this case. I think there's a lot that could have been handled better. The biggest thing for me, though, is Maggie's phone. Just not preserving that in a basic manner. To figure out her GPS that I did with Paul, it's pretty troublesome for me. Luke,
you can't expect perfection. Obviously a defense lawyer will always try to nitpick things that aren't done. But when there's glaring errors, you can expect competence. And so here, it was very clear that Alex Murdaugh got an initial benefit of the doubt, at least in the way they searched the property or lack thereof, Alameda, things like that, just kind of from who he was. They didn't kick everybody out of the house and scour his home immediately. They never properly searched Alameda until way later, once this kind of blue raincoat tarp evidence came up. And that was just due to a general deference. So you want SLED or really any head law enforcement agency to put that aside. We once had a cop shooting case where SLED, by law, really has to investigate, because cops can't investigate themselves whether they shot or shot at in a way that was appropriate or not. But SLED gave this particular officer a lot of deference and really didn't question him too hard. And, he told him, well, I shot 3 times. And then you look at the shell casings, and there's 4 shell casings on the ground. But when he also gave him his magazine, and it was very clear that if his magazine was full, he had shot closer to 6, 7 times. And he said it was his practice always to keep his magazine full. And so they never said, well, where's the rest of those shell casings? And it turned out they were in his car because he was doing a drive-by shooting on our client. Rather than investigating him, he shot first. And so our client shot back. And so SLED didn't really properly critique and analyze that, and whether the assertion that our client shot first or the cop, what was based more on the math, the facts that don't lie. And that was the fact that his casings were ejecting into his own car as he was doing a drive-by shooting. And then SLED let him drive his car later to be examined and processed. They didn't secure that vehicle. And so it's no wonder that those shell casings were never found. And of course, we got not guilty on that because we were able to show that he shot first. So, but what if SLED had treated him like anybody else in a shootout? and not giving him the deference of his story or giving him the deference to drive his own car to have it processed.
I mean, they didn't even process the inside of his car and look for shell casings. They just believed him when he said the shot count. So that's how much deference he got at the time. So,
So you can't realistically expect perfection, but you don't want huge holes. So that's a long way away. Hopefully it answers your question. But there are, lots of good law enforcement that do a very fine job. And, a lot of scenes are not this complex. And it is maybe a matter of just collecting the shell casings and making sure no one tramples over them. And finding the gun and comparing it and seeing what happens. But this was a way more complex scene.
Let's talk about David Owen, and he lied to the grand jury about blood on Alec Murdaugh's shirt, correct?
Yes, he did.
Okay, let's talk about that and what are the repercussions of that?
I think that goes along with Jim Griffin will be saying how sloppy Sled was, but not only sloppy, but reckless and deceitful. Not only in the evidence in the case, but how they even got charges through the state grand jury. And so, I mean, at the point in time, David Owens would have known that there was not blood on that shirt. And he, in his testimony, if I recall, he was like, well, that was like kind of outside my purview, but when you're a lead investigator for a double murder case, the buck stops with you. And so having testimony before the grand jury of a bloody shirt, of course you're gonna, along with other lies that we've heard about throughout these weeks of the trial, but like a bloody shirt plus the lies and financial motivations, of course you're gonna get a murder warrant. But yeah, that was big for me because you either lying then or you're lying now, and if you're willing to lie to the grand jury under oath, the inference is that you're willing to lie to the jury here, and he kind of evaded that.
Well, that wasn't the only lie he told the grand jury, and he was able to get away with that by claiming I wasn't sure exactly when the scientific conclusion came out that there was no blood on Mr. Murdaugh's shirt. He could kind of play dumb, but what he couldn't play dumb on was he was confronted by Jim Griffin with his interview with Alex Murdaugh when he came in with his lawyer to kind of, under the guise of, well, what's going on with the investigation, and then he got interrogated. Owen said, well, look, we know that the shotgun that killed Paul had a certain type of buckshot and then a turkey load, steel shots, and that's kind of unusual. And so he confronted Murdaugh and said, look, we found numerous guns that are loaded just like that around your property. And that was a lie. It was a trick. And on cross-examination, he said, yeah, I lied, but I'm allowed to do that. And yes, there's case law that says investigators investigating a case can lie to a suspect to see if they can get him to admit to something based on that lie. Well, you're not allowed to lie to a grand jury or any jury. And so he took that same kind of bit of lie, and he literally said that same thing to the grand jury per the transcript, and said, we found other shotguns on that property that were loaded that same way. Just bold-faced lie. And it's nothing that he can say I didn't know about some testing. That was his lie he confronted Murdaugh with. So then he just gave it to the grand jury to insinuate that not only, hey, you got blood on the shirt, there's a pattern here of the way they load these shotguns. Sure, we don't have the gun, but here's the inference you can draw, which is that it's obviously the way he loads these guns. This is almost like his calling card, his MO. And I would be very surprised and disappointed if we did not hear that massively from Jim Griffin tomorrow. I mean, you don't want a 4-hour closing like Waters, but God, if you gotta put to talk about, that's finger number 2. Middle finger.
Yeah. Something that's also interesting, when I was on the stand, he mentioned, and now I think he got David Owens confused with someone else at the time, but he ironically mentioned that why he wasn't so forthcoming about being at the dog kennels that night was because he was familiar with a David Owens that had been known for lying to grand juries to try to get a certain conviction. And I guess it turns out to have not been the same person, but I do find that to be ironic.
Yeah, a different sled agent.
A different sled
He
agent.
didn't feel he could trust.
He didn't trust those David sled agents.
Yeah. Okay, speaking a little bit more about the jury, walk us through, so the jury selects a foreman, and in this case it is a forelady. Talk us through like that process, what that's going to look like in the deliberation. Yes.
Well, actually, Cliff Newman selected the foreperson.
Oh, okay.
That's his practice. Some of the jurors like to do it themselves.
Okay.
But Cliff was the one that said, you're going to be the foreperson. He did that in the trial we had with him recently. He just kind of...
It's usually the person sitting front row on the right.
Right.
Okay.
And who knows why he does that, but that's...
Are they allowed to decline?
No one has.
Okay.
I've never seen it. But
So he just picks his fave.
he usually picks the person that situates themselves front and to the right.
Okay.
It's not right out the
It's
gate.
so interesting.
But it's like after a witness or so, he'll let them settle back into a routine of who is sitting in the front on the right, and then they'll go, all right,
Well,
you are the foreperson.
What's interesting, the juror that sits front to the right is also closest to the witness box. And I just wonder if Judge Newman's practice over the years has been, I'll make that person the foreperson because they are volunteer. It's like sitting on the first row in a teacher's class. Like you're paying attention, there's nowhere to hide, that kind of thing. I just wonder if that plays into it. But he always pretty much does the person that kind of finds himself in that position.
And that person, once you're deliberating, isn't given any additional weight. The only
Okay.
responsibility they're giving is to like tally votes and then like write it on the verdict form,
Mhm.
guilty, the not guilty. If there's a question, to write a question. So
Yeah,
Or
they're
like
not.
request information,
right,
like kind of
They're not
request
the
from.
boss of the jury.
now it's interesting though that I sometimes wonder whether they might believe they have a little more weight, or whether the jury might think they have a little more say just because they have been given that role. I doubt it, but you never know what goes on back there. There's all kinds of horse trading, dynamics,
Wild stuff.
fighting.
Okay, let's talk about that.
I mean, we
Horse
all
trading? What?
Yeah.
compromises.
Okay, I
Like
see it.
literally compromises to get out of there. I mean, you're gonna have people with different minds. They're trying to do the best they can to come to a unanimous verdict. It's very hard, and if I'm doing a death case, I just want one person to have doubt, and I encourage them to raise their hand and go, you know what, my duty is to deliberate, but my duty is not to bend to your will.
Yeah.
And so as long as
Right.
I've considered the evidence, raise my hand, knock on that door and say, bailiff, we're done. And you want that kind of, that gets you a life sentence and not a death sentence in a death case. But in this case, that's why we try to empower our jurors to rise above, but stick to their guns. Yes, you have to have a unanimous decision to reach a verdict, but you don't have to reach a verdict.
Mhm. Right.
I guarantee you Alex Murdaugh is perfectly happy with a hung jury.
Mhm.
But we know just from doing the trials, trying to speak to jurors afterwards, they talk about some of the compromises that they make. And we know sometimes they'll split a verdict in a bizarre way, where they just kind of threw in the towel and made a compromise and gave some faction, let's say, a conviction, but
Well, that is 100% why Jim Griffin, after Alex Murdaugh confessed to all the financial crimes, said, and you have been charged with all these things that you just admitted to, right? And those are pending criminal charges against you? Yes, sir. And that forecasts the jury that he's never going to go home. And that is what we call, I've talked about it before in some of these other lives, that's jury nullification, where you're trying to say, listen, even if you believe there's enough evidence, if some of you don't, that'll be them horse trading in the back going, listen, guys, we can cut this guy a break if we find there's reasonable doubt, even in light of all the international scrutiny, because guess what? He's not going anywhere. We don't have to feel the pressure that this is like, if we don't convict him, he's going to go home and sleep in his bed at night. That's not going to happen. So like that's exactly why Jim Griffin did it. Normally you're not allowed to do that, but the state had brought in those financial crimes for their motive, and so it allows Jim Griffin to raise them as another way for his client to go to prison. So you don't have to convict here because he's going to SCDC, the South Carolina Correctional Department, over here in a matter of time, and that was pretty savvy on Jim Griffin's part.
Yeah, someone's saying here, I could not send someone away for life for something I'm not absolutely sure about. Can we talk about, without any reason of doubt, what that really means in South Carolina?
Whoever that person is, I'd like them in my next jury. But yeah, that's really what you want, is someone who you're not going to convict or return a verdict of guilty unless you're convinced beyond a reasonable doubt. I would tell that person, if you have a doubt, and I know you're reasonable, then you cannot, under our law, convict. So it has to be in the jury, and you heard from Creighton Waters, I think he had some of the law up there in a PowerPoint. It might say something like, proof beyond all possible doubt is not required. It's beyond a reasonable doubt. And so
right, did the Mona Lisa.
Right. And that was kind of cheesy, but I got the point he was trying to make.
I mean, it could be effective. I think any demonstrative like that is important for a jury.
But that is the standard. Even if you hate this man and he stole from a Tony Satterfield his entire wrongful death settlement for his mother, who was a longtime employee, you hate him for that. You have to sit there and go, all right, I hate him, but have they proven this? And I don't want my hate to establish proof. That's what a jury has to do if they're doing their job the right way. That's what Jim Griffin has to hopefully convince them to do, whereas Creighton Waters is trying to blend that all together and let your hate be your proof. Let it establish he's a bad human. Bad humans lie. Bad humans kill for no good reason. Please convict. So that's the battle.
That is the battle, and we've seen a few jurors have blankets over their head, maybe put tissues in their ears. Some maybe even falling asleep. What do you guys think about that?
I've heard tissues in ears and blankets over heads. That is not good.
Yeah, and then can they not be reprimanded? Like, can Judge Newman not kind of be like, hello?
I would be very surprised. Maybe that's when Newman was deciding to take a certain break. He seemed to take them. And I know that he likes to do a morning break. You get your lunch break in the afternoon. But if he's like, let's all stand kind of randomly, it may literally be to force a juror to stand up and get the blanket. I don't think he wants to humiliate a juror in front of an international audience. I think if there's no cameras, he might be a little more direct about it, but that's not a good sign. It means either somebody has bored that juror to tears and they're not listening, which is not what you want for either side, or they made up their mind a long time ago, which is not what you want for probably either side. In this case, maybe you want that if you're the state because you had so much other crime evidence. I have not seen that before on my jury.
Yes,
not on our juries.
What's the craziest thing you've seen happen on your juries?
Well, we had you have in South Carolina, you don't get what they call like extensive voir dire. A lot of states, you get to ask 1,000 questions to a prospective juror to really kind of get to know them before you see them. In South Carolina, you don't. You get to know like where they live, what do they do for a living, what does their spouse do for a living, and some general questions. So these are strangers that you're sitting on your jury, and we've had jurors come up with like personal knowledge of a victim and say like, I know that person halfway through a trial. It wasn't.
We had a love connection on a jury one time.
Well.
Oh.
In a trial.
Well, I'm not talking about what you're talking about. I'm talking about. You can talk about that, but I'm thinking in that Edgefield case, I feel like this young man and woman kind of coupled up, and then like we could see them like holding hands. by the end of it, like as they walk to and from.
Yes, we did see that.
And we were like, oh, interesting. So like you didn't waste your time back there, I guess.
I wonder if they came to the same conclusion.
And then you tell your story.
So Luke and I mostly try our cases together, but
this was my story actually.
There.
I once had a murder case.
Yeah.
Where one of Brian's ex-girlfriends was in the jury pool. And the prosecutor learned about it and came up and was like, is that one of Brian's ex-girlfriends? I'm hearing that. I'm like, yeah. And I was like, I kind of inferred it was a bad breakup. I was like, yeah, it was, yeah. And so she sat this juror thinking that
revenge deliberation.
This woman would not like to look at my face as we're identical twins, and I knew her a little bit.
That breakup was great. It was very amicable. Like it was perfect.
So it didn't exactly work the way the prosecutor wanted, but that was interesting staring at your ex-girlfriend throughout that murder trial.
We just think about jurors. I once had a jury trial with Cliff Newman, where my client decided it would be, we picked a jury with him present, and then right when we were getting ready to do opening statements, and I was trying this case with this really good friend, lawyer of mine. She no longer really is a trial lawyer anymore, but she was getting ready to do her opening, and my client, he was a smoker, and he was out on the smoke break, and he was not coming back, and I went outside of the courthouse, and he saw me looking at him, and he started running. And he said, don't follow me, Sheely, don't follow me. And he was fast. I was not going to catch this guy. And so we got up there, and we did the whole case without him. And under our laws, you have a Fifth Amendment right to remain silent, so like you don't even have to be present. And so actually, Cliff Newman had to give a jury instruction that said, you cannot consider the fact that he's not present as any evidence against him. Everyone's got the same rights of presumption of innocence and right to remain silent. You can't consider that. But when he was running out of the courthouse, he managed to pass a juror that was coming in from the break, and he said something like, pray for me. And so that juror reported it to Judge Newman, and so we did this case, and we got a not guilty, even with our client not there, and we even said like he had someplace to be in a hurry. And so basically we won the case, and right when they were rendering the verdict of not guilty, they just picked this guy up on the bench warrant, and so he got brought back into the courtroom from underneath the courthouse where the holding cell is, in handcuffs. He got brought back, propped beside us for the reading of the acquittal, and he was all happy. But then Judge Newman, based on what he was hearing from the juror that said, he said, pray for me, had a whole separate hearing on whether our client was intimidating jurors and was tampering with the jury. And I recall we had a 2-day hearing after that about whether our client was going to be found criminally responsible for juror intimidation. And our guy got up on the stand, so like we're exhausted because we just won this case. We were stressed out because our client wasn't there. We win the case, and then we're having a 2-day hearing on that, and the jurors, after they got done deliberating, had to go testify about what they observed, and that was wild. And so ultimately Judge Newman found that he didn't find any violations. He didn't find that the witness tampering was actually witness tampering. It was nothing, and our guy ultimately walked out. But like, he made it so much harder on himself. So that, a little bit of an interesting jury experience in front of our Judge Cliff Newman here.
Yeah. And yes, it was breaking news. These guys are identical twins.
8 minutes older, right here.
Brian is 8 minutes older. We have a lot of comments about the matching shoes today.
Oh.
Do you guys ever share shoes, swap shoes, or are you the same shoe size?
No.
I think his foot.
So it's not that identical?
It's just random. We have. This happened to be kind of the walnut color shoe today, but
not intentional.
Yeah.
Unintentional matching, identical twins.
Brian has the beard. We had one judge always refers to him as the good Sheely and me as the bad Sheely.
Oh.
And that has something to do with the motion I made to exhume the body of a baby one time. And that name kind of stuck.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Long story.
that'll be covered on another episode of the Bring the Jury podcast. So a lot going on with the jury, a lot going on with the audience too throughout this trial, and people are even showing up as early as I've heard 4:30 a.m. Like, get a good seat to watch everything unfold. Can you all kind of talk about that? Maybe what you've witnessed. I know there were some things happening with Buster, other audience members.
It's a real who's who. I mean, we know so many people in that courtroom, other attorneys that are interested, and they go down there, and even some lawyers that are involved in some of these civil cases representing the victims of these financial crimes are there. And, they're being thrown on network television as kind of consultants. And it is a circus. But yeah, everyone wants to be able to say they were in the courtroom one of these weeks to be able to see this trial. I mean, it's the biggest trial in South Carolina in a long time that we've had.
Right, especially non-death penalty trial.
Right.
And you got law students and middle school students on field trips and just gawkers, onlookers, and it's a relatively small courtroom, so it's just wild.
And Hannah, we're gonna have to get back on air here in a little bit, and I've got to get a sip of water or something. So maybe one last question or something.
One last question. People want to know, what's your zodiac sign?
I think
that's a good one to end on.
So our shared birthday is September 24th. So someone's gonna have to look that up.
I think it's a Virgo.
I think we're Libras.
No, you're not a Libra.
We're not?
Wait. Oh, Libra. Yeah, maybe.
Yeah, definitely Libra.
I forget.
There's a little cutoff right around there.
I feel like we're close to the cutoff, so I'm not.
We're Libra.
What does that mean?
I'm pretty sure too that the Libra symbol is the balance symbol that you see to represent the law. So that's.
And the law office that we bought
Sorry if I'm
a
wrong.
few years ago is very historic. It's 1835 building, and it comes with these very cool signposts out front that has these twin sphinxes that are iron casts.
It's amazing.
And
we didn't even realize
it was all dilapidated and covered in paint and wood, and we had this brilliant artist handyman, shout out to Mike, who totally redid it and brought out this cast iron sphinxes, and sphinxes are supposed to be protectors and things like that. So we love that. Please don't come visit us there, but Libras, sphinxes, twins.
Libras, sphinxes, twins. Yes, always justice for Bubba. Always. Bubba forever. No, do not know Alex Murdaugh personally. But yeah, always hashtag justice for Bubba. Catch you all next time. If you want more from Luke and Brian, they will be going live on WLTX. You can catch them on YouTube for their After Hours with JR, who you all saw at the beginning of this episode with the great socks.
The episode of Bring the Jury.
Bring the Jury. This is episode 8 of Bring the Jury. Bye, everyone. Have a great evening.